Welcome everyone to another episode of Hometown History. I'm Jamie.
I'm Dami, and we are live from the Newberry Friends Burial Ground in Newberrytown.
Yeah. So I just give a little tiny background. My name is Jamie and I'm a social studies teacher. I got my doctorate in American Studies from Penn State, and then I also write a local history blog called Wondering in York County, and then also run a website with Jim McClure called Witness in York.
And I'm Dami, and I am by day librarian for the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and then I run the Preserving the History of Newberrytown Facebook group, and I'm a Civil War reenactor.
Yeah. So tonight's episode is all about cemeteries. Our title is A Hill to Die On, How We Bury Our Loved Ones and the Unloved. We've got 4 cemeteries we're hitting. The first one is down closer to downtown York in North York called Prospect Hill. Then we're going to move along the ridge to City Cemetery, and then right down the street is another cemetery called Lebanon, and then finish right here, hometown.
Yep, wrap it up right here in Newberrytown.
Yeah. So let's talk first about Prospect Hill. So Prospect Hill was founded in the 1840s, so it's pretty old. It's one of the largest and oldest cemeteries in York County. So if you're going to look at some cool iconography, some beautiful images, that's the place to go. Yep. So at the time when that was built in York in the 1840s, downtown was where people were interred. So the cemetery is where you were buried, and was also where you lived. So it wasn't the nicest place.
Right.
You know, people didn't want to go and visit their loved ones. So to die was not pleasant already, because think back in the 1840s, it's before we have antibiotics.
Different hygiene practices.
Exactly. Not access to health care, lack of nutrition, you name it. And then when people did die, it was this like catastrophe, and then you're just buried into the ground, and that's really it. And people didn't come visit you.
Right.
They did have slate for their monument, their headstones, but a lot of times it was also wood too, which, you know, decayed.
Yeah, that's not gonna last.
Yeah, you forget about your loved ones. So then in the 1830s though, in Boston, there was this first time that we had the rural cemetery movement. And this is a part of the Romanticism, this era of why are we just burying our dead in the ground? We want to remember them, and also we want a park, we want a place to go. So it was like this tandem project of let's take a few acres out the right side of York, and that was Prospect Hill, and it started with 5.5 acres, and they started burying people, but then giving them more like dignity in death.
Right.
So it was like you would go and visit them and have like a hill, and there would be trees, and there would be plants, even like benches. It was just a nice thing to do. And so you got to go, like you see these creepy old pictures of people in the Victorian era, like picnicking, like by their loved ones.
It was a welcoming place to mourn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you picnic on a loved one?
I don't know if I'd have a picnic. I mean, but you can go around here, and there's some local cemeteries where you'll see older people, probably visiting a spouse that's passed away, that are drinking their morning coffee there.
Yeah.
So,
or just sitting and thinking, contemplating.
not necessarily a full-blown picnic, but
yeah. Well, and I'm guilty of cemeteries also being parks. So I am a historian, so I definitely respect the gravestones and the lives that they lived. But I also used to live right next door to Prospect Hill. I was in the new apartments right there by Sigsbee and 7th. And so my apartment, I was on the 2nd story, and I could look out over Prospect Hill, and I just thought it was beautiful. My friends all thought I was nuts and morbid.
No, I agree. I'm the same way.
It was just beautiful. You look out and you see the gravestones, and so then I would go running, and I would run around, because it was 2 miles for a loop.
Okay.
And so I would just do 2 miles, and every time I went jogging, I noticed something new.
Right.
Like they have these beautiful headstones that are more spherical. They have ones with people on them, and you just start noticing and thinking, wow, these people lived before me.
Right.
They had these beautiful lives, and like one day I'm going to be on the ground, and we're all going to die one day.
Right.
It's like our universal human condition. You might feel like you and I are different, but at the end of the day, you know, we're all going to pass. So yeah, so Prospect Hill, it was a chance for people to be remembered. Now they have 170 acres, 60 of which are still underdeveloped. Dami, guess how many people are interred at Prospect Hill?
Thousands.
Yeah, thousands. 90,000 people.
That's a lot.
Yeah, to put it in perspective, there are about 44,000 people right now living in downtown York.
Yeah, there's, I think, a little less than 15,000 in Newberry Township.
Wow. so like multiply that, and
we could
that's
all
how many
move
people.
into Prospect
Yeah.
Cemetery.
Yeah. for me, it's comforting. It's like, okay, you know, one day we're going to end up in the ground and they live great lives, and
it's not going to be developed over.
well, and I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, so the city at the time is where people, so before they had Prospect Hill, if you were buried in the city, there was a chance that the city would want to develop where you were buried.
Right.
And so they would come through and pick up the bodies and then build a road there, or build a bank there. Whereas Prospect Hill, it was like a permanency.
Right.
You're there, and then you were talking earlier about people wanting to be buried with their families.
Right, yeah, you sort of had family plots. So mom, dad, and then the kids and their spouses and their children, you'd form your own plot within the cemeteries. And it was your family and then the next family, but it was more distinct. You could tell sometimes it was the landscaping, sometimes there was a little fence that divided them.
Yeah.
So
These fences are interesting. Would you build a fence around yours?
I don't think my family is important enough to have their own fence.
It is very regal, isn't it? Like, look at my
fence. But if I keep making these videos, maybe I will get a fence around my family plot.
So speaking of memorials and how we remember people, you can tell a lot about a person from their headstone. Their name, like for example, Dami and I were looking earlier, and we are near the grave of, his name is Joseph Field. And we don't know much more about him other than when he was born and when he died and his name. But you can also, though, read headstones.
Right.
So, like, for my students, if I say, okay, Dami, if I say the word, like, we're going to go read today, like, what do you think of?
Read a book.
Yeah, books and articles. But you can also read many other things. Like, you can read a picture, a photograph, a political cartoon. You can read headstones. And so looking at Joseph Field here, it was written in English. And so we know his ethnicity and where he came from, and now, like, so there's a lot of German places around York. So you can tell a place was a German cemetery based off of the images then that they put on the headstones.
Okay.
Some of the German images that they used were hearts, rosettes, and tulips. Isn't that interesting?
They liked their tulips.
Yeah. If you're watching the video and want to comment, if you could put anything on your gravestone, school appropriate, what would you put on your gravestone?
And you know, I saw on Facebook the other day, there was a grandma that had her famous chocolate chip cookie recipe printed on her headstone.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
It was so cool. I guess, I don't know if she didn't share it in life, but she said, you know, I'm going to leave something for my family. You're going to be able to make my chocolate chip cookies.
That's so
and
cool.
anyone else who visits her.
Oh man, that's
so
awesome.
I like that. Some people put their occupation.
Yeah.
You know, if you were the famous town doctor, if you were a really influential politician, you know, it might say Senator so-and-so, it might say Doctor so-and-so. So you can glean a lot also from how big your headstone is.
Yeah.
Are you going to get a really big headstone? Is it going to be a flat one that just lays in the ground? You know, there's so many different things you can do.
Yeah. And in talking about size of headstones, that is not only indicative of wealth, but also age.
Right.
Like we were talking earlier, you know, if you walk through a part of a cemetery where there's those tiny little baby headstones, you know.
They're babies.
Yeah,
it's
you know,
sad.
infant mortality was kind of high, and that's not always the case, but that's when you get down on your hands and knees, like we were earlier, trying to read what's on the headstone. And also lambs. Lambs are also a symbol of a child. Yep.
Right.
So another thing about, so when you look at Prospect Hill, there's a lot of just working class people there, but there's also a lot of famous people there.
There are, yeah.
Signer of the Declaration of Independence. There is a Civil War commander. There is a famous industrialist, Arthur Farquhar. And then right next door though, so when I was up in my apartment, my one side looked over Prospect Hill, but the other side looked over this like random grass field.
Okay.
And then I was like, I wonder what's down there. And then come to find out, Dami, what's down there?
City Cemetery. So if you've never heard of Potter's Field before, it's a biblical term. So when they went to buy this land to bury people, it was where they were excavating clay for pots. So Potter's Field. And unfortunately, it was a place to bury people that didn't necessarily, they weren't going to be remembered. So they were people that when they passed away, you didn't know who they were, you couldn't identify them. Next of kin never came forward. Or they just didn't have the money for a burial. So you're putting them in just a pine box and you're burying them and there's no headstone. So you're looking at this property, like you said, it's a field. And York County was doing this, and unfortunately the original field, I think they built a high school now, and they had to disinter 600 bodies and they had to rebury them in a new Potter's Field. So that is the city cemetery that you're going to see today. But again, a lot of these people now we know who some of them are, and they were able to disinter them. And I think you said there were 4 black people that were disinterred and moved to the Lebanon cemetery. So thank goodness, you know, we were able to use history and evidence to figure out who those people were. But it really is, it's a place where, you know, they don't have the headstones, they don't have the iconography to tell you who they are, to tell you what kind of lives they lived. And all we really know about them is that they were probably lower class, you know, they didn't have the money, probably fell on hard times. Or, you know, maybe they could have just been traveling through, not from the area.
That has happened,
You know, like, unfortunately, you went somewhere and no one really knows who you are, and, you know,
Gotta
you
take care of
passed
your body.
away. Yeah, so, you know, if no one comes forward to claim you, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's kind that they gave you a place to be buried, and your body was taken care of, and there was dignity in the burial, but unfortunately we can't go there and mourn you in a specific way.
Yeah, or research you, figure out who you were.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is something to be said, though, for, you know, unmarked graves, unknown graves. It's a place that, you know, should be looked at, and you can memorialize them, you know, as a whole.
Well, and it makes you wonder, like, who is worthy of having your name etched in stone?
Right.
You know, are somehow they unworthy? I would say definitely not. You know, they're human beings, they deserve a place. But it's kind of where rubber meets the road. No one was paying for their headstone.
Right.
So
do you have a family member that's going to come forward and say, I want that person to have a headstone?
Right.
You know, not everyone's lucky enough to be able to buy a cemetery plot and a headstone while they're still living.
Yeah.
Because that's a really common practice today. Probably not so much, you know, back in the day. I don't think people were planning ahead in that way.
Right, yeah.
Life was shorter.
Oh gosh, can you imagine seeing like your name like etched in stone? If you're one of those people, comment below, say like I have seen my name etched into a tombstone.
My parents already bought their headstones, they already have a plot.
And they're in and everything? Like that you can go and visit, like where they're gonna go?
Yeah, it's right next to my grandparents, and I'm named after my grandma, so my name really is on a headstone already, so that's really awkward. Like, and Dominish is not a common name, so to see it right there on a headstone, it's like, oh, come on, but it's my grandma. So, you know, but yeah, it is, it's a little eerie, but like my mom always said, you know, it was the responsible thing to do. They were married and they had kids, and they bought life insurance, and they bought burial plots, because when they passed away, they didn't want my brother and I to have to pay thousands of dollars.
Wow.
So now, all they have to do, I guess, is get their death date etched in when they finally pass away. You know, it's, I guess you can look at it as like fiscally responsible.
Right, it is. I mean, it really is, and then it's less thing for to do with the people that you leave behind. So if you want to go and visit the city cemetery, we highly encourage you to go there. It's a great juxtaposition of seeing Prospect Hill, and then you see this grass field. And we can put, if you're on YouTube right now, we'll put the coordinates and link below so you can go visit it. But
on Facebook.
And it is close to the District Thai restaurant, but we'll give you more specifics. So if you move along the ridge in York, in North York, and you go past Prospect Hill and you go past the city cemetery, you'll next come across Lebanon Cemetery.
Okay.
Lebanon Cemetery is a historically black cemetery, and it was from 1872 until now. People are still there. It started out with 2 acres, and now they're up to 5. There are currently 3,658 documented people that are buried there. But there's still 1,500 graves that we still don't know who they are.
Wow,
Yeah, so luckily there is the Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, and they're working along with the board of the cemetery. They're working to try to restore these grave sites. So they're going out. I mean, this is volunteerism.
And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
For people you don't even know.
Right?
Like, that's York County.
Yeah.
Like, I love that.
Yeah. It shows how good people can be.
Right. Yep. So they're out there, they're scrubbing the headstones, they're weeding, they're weed whacking around it, and it's a whole crew. John Fetterman, our lieutenant governor, and his wife, the second lady, they both, Giselle, decided to start a GoFundMe page, and it's online. Again, we'll put links below, but they're hoping to find $100,000.
Wow.
Right?
It's such a good cause, though. It really is. The money's going to such a good cause.
Yep. Yeah, so a lot of them work tirelessly to research who's buried there, to identify them, and then to document them. And so what's neat about, so Dami and I are, so she's in her 20s still, I'm 30, but we are historians, but we're building on what other people are doing. So Sam Dorm is one of them, but then the amazing crew like Tina, they're all working really hard to uncover these gravestones, and then we can use that to research more.
Right.
Like, they're in the field, literally, you know?
Yeah, they're out there in the hot summer heat on their hands and knees, scrubbing tombstones
Right.
and weeding and digging things up. It's not easy work, and for them to be doing it on their own time, on their own money, I mean, kudos to them.
Right.
So.
Yep, and they have all the people that are currently buried in Lebanon, which there are some amazing people. There is Dr. George Bowles. He was big in the black community leading with civil rights. We also have Reverend Thomas Montooth, who is a leader, and he was a civil rights activist, abolitionists, enslaved people. There were military veterans, and you can see all of those names at the York County History Center archives. And the people there, I know, again, building on other historians,
Right.
June Burke-Lloyd and then Lila Foreman-Shaw, she has since passed. They did a lot of research in an article in the Journal with the History Center. So you can go and check this out, the History Center, but they went and looked at the 370 known cemeteries in York to then tell us more about it. So we're doing all the lead work. You go out there and learn more about it.
And if you're interested in local Civil War history, a lot of the 87th is buried there on this walking tour that you can go on.
Yeah.
So the 87th was recruited historically out of York County. So you'll probably find some ancestors that you didn't know participated in the Civil War.
And Dami, how do you know about the 87th?
I'm in the 87th. I portray a soldier in the 87th. I'm a lowly private, hoping to get a promotion one of these days. It's been like 5 years.
Keep on trucking along.
Trying.
Yep. Okay, so then that brings us to where we are right now. So we kept on moving along north. We're on a ridge here, so we're on our 4th cemetery. Tell us more about Newberry.
I'd like to think that all roads lead back to Newberrytown, but we're at the Y in Newberrytown. The Y is right behind us, and we are at the Newberry Friends Burial Ground. And Newberrytown is actually named for the Newberry Friends, which is what we call Quakers. So these days you think, you know, Quaker meeting houses, you think Quaker cemeteries, but it's really a Quaker burial ground. And they prefer to be called Friends. So that's what they called each other, that's what we're gonna call them. And, you know, this is a very old cemetery. I don't think that anyone was buried here after the Civil War started.
Wow.
So this is Revolutionary War, this is War of 1812. And there are a few veterans. You can't see it in this shot. I can take pictures and put them on Facebook then, but there are some Revolutionary War and War of 1812 veterans buried here.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, that's great Newberrytown history, you know, that we had people here fighting for our freedom during the Revolutionary War. But, you know, unfortunately, the cemetery fell into disrepair. And in the 1980s, a wonderful woman named Shirley Wilt, she worked at the Y here in Newberrytown at the beauty parlor that was once a one-room schoolhouse. And she looked over here and she kept thinking, you know, there's so many weeds and the headstones are falling over. I mean, if you look at the one behind us, it's still standing and it has been repaired a little bit, but, you know, it's not in the best shape because it's so old. And, you know, headstones don't last forever. The writing was getting rubbed off, you know, from time and wear, and trees had fallen down here. This is a really shaded area with a lot of trees. So a storm would come through, you know, and a tree falls down and it's going to knock over some headstones. And that's not a cheap thing to get fixed. So she was trying to figure out, where can I get the manpower, where can I get the money? And thankfully she was able to get into contact with the local Quaker community, and it's now being maintained by a landscaping company.
Oh, cool.
So it is being overseen by the Quakers once again, which is great,
That
you
is
know.
great.
And I mean, it's their ancestors and it's our ancestors. I mean, it's our local history here. So I think a lot of people in Newberrytown will drive past the Y, they're going to the variety shop, and they always look over and like, oh, that's a cool cemetery.
Like an afterthought.
Yeah, but they don't really think anything of it. They think, well, it's a really old cemetery, and I always see it. But now you know that it has a really rich local history. There's veterans here, and you know, you might be related to someone that was buried in this cemetery.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, you know, Dami and I, we're nearing the end of our program, and when you think about the places that we discussed today, they're all in your backyard. It's hometown, York County. You can visit them. They are public, so we encourage you to go check them out, look at some of the epitaphs and the iconography, and learn more. So we'll be back in the fall.
Yeah, we're trying to bring you more episodes. So we did 4 episodes for our summer series. This is the 4th. And we want to give you 4 more episodes in the winter. So if there's anything that we haven't covered, You know, if you know some local lore, something that you've always wondered about but you don't have the answer, let us know. Comment on our Facebook pages, ask questions in the group, shoot us an email. We're even on the YouTube, you know, so you can comment on there. But we want to know what you want to know about. We want to bring you topics that are interesting and relevant to the area.
So stay tuned to the end of September for the beginning of our fall series.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.